Is it finally time to ask that age-old question again? Is Nintendo doomed? And maybe all console gaming in general, at least in the US, based on this latest report? Hey everyone, Andre here to answer that, or at least talk about it, and no, Nintendo's probably not doomed, at least not yet. They're still the fastest selling game console of all time with the Switch 2. However, these latest numbers have to be even giving them a little bit of pause, because it's not looking great for anyone in the video game industry, at least on the console side. Because as you can see here, IGN's reporting based on numbers from Circana and analysts from video game analyst Matt Piscatella, that this is the worst selling November since 1995 for video game hardware and software. That's freaking wild. That was 30 years ago, and yet things are barely selling better than then. And that was back when Donkey Kong Country 2 came out. Like, that's a long time ago. So that's not looking great, and especially if you're Nintendo, because looking at this, as summarized by Jeff Keighley, the PlayStation 5 actually outsold the Nintendo Switch 2 for November of this year, which is freaking wild to me. That's a brand new launch year for the Switch 2, and yet it's being outsold by a multi-year-old system? What's going on here? Now, that could be because the Switch 2 had a big launch. Obviously, again, it's the fastest selling console of all time, famously not supply constrained like most console launches are, and it might be for that reason that it's just not selling as well in this November. Now, there could be another reason too, which we'll get to soon enough, but yeah, that's a little bit concerning. But it's even worse if you're Xbox, because they're being outsold by the next Playground, something I hadn't even heard of until a few weeks ago, and even funnier, that thing is basically a new Kinect. So Microsoft is being beat by a technology they abandoned years ago, which is kind of amazing. In any case, being outsold by PS5 is not the main worry for Nintendo at this point. This actually is a bigger worry, going back to the IGN article, in that we actually look at the sales for each platform. They're really not good. Xbox is down 70% year over year, meaning they sold 70% fewer this November than the previous November, which isn't too surprising considering the state of Xbox, but it's still really horrible. PS5 is not as bad, but it's still down 40% year over year, which again is very concerning for Nintendo that they're being outsold by a console that sold 40% less than last year. Then we have Nintendo. Now, obviously the Switch 2 wasn't released this time last year, so if you compare the combined sales of Switch 2 and Switch 1 for this year versus Switch 1 last year, they're down 10%, and that's again combining hardware sales for both platforms this year. That is crazy to me, the fact that they're selling 10% less than a single platform, being Switch 1 last year, in its 8th year at that point. That is mind-blowing, and that has to be a little bit concerning again for Nintendo, considering how strong of a launch they had. So that suggests to me that maybe momentum is kind of dying for Switch 2, at least for right now, and that has to be, again, deeply concerning for Nintendo or any shareholders in Nintendo, because that is definitely worrying. So the question is, can Nintendo, rebuild the momentum going into next year? Though obviously, this may not be a specific video game console manufacturer problem, but it could be hinting at larger problems in the state, or in the US at least, considering, how things are more expensive and unemployment is at a 4-year high right now, and there's other, economic issues at play here as well. So that could be what's really weighing down these figures. In addition, Matt Piscatella even pointed out that if we compare the prices of hardware units, like back in 2019, the average price of hardware was $235, as compared to now it's $439. That's a massive amount more. So the fact that things are more expensive again, with people having less spending money, could be really weighing down these numbers. Now, something else I think could be a factor beyond just the state of the economy is, let me bring up something I want to show you here, being on the top sales on Switch 2, because I think we're also lacking that big November title that we often get from Nintendo. Yes, there was Metroid Prime 4, but the thing is, Metroid Prime, or Metroids in general, historically, they sell okay, not amazing, and they are kind of like a niche series. So the fact that it's #1 on Switch 2, I think says more about the state of software on Switch 2 right now than it does anything about Metroid Prime 4. I could be wrong, we'll get final sales numbers, I'm sure, with the next quarterly report. Maybe it's being a huge success, but I think that's not the case for another reason, which I'll get to. But the fact that Metroid Prime 4 is the only one, in the top 2 right here, the second title is Red Dead Redemption, and finally we have, Pokemon Legends ZA in the third slot, which, it is a game that came out, a couple months ago at this point, I believe. In any case, the point is, Metroid Prime 4 being #1, to me at least, isn't a great sign, though it's good for Metroid. Less good for Nintendo, because if we take a look at another sales chart, being for the Switch 1, well, look at this. This is where things get a little bit more interesting, because remember, Metroid Prime 4 is available on both consoles, and it's nowhere to be found in the top 6 on Switch 1. In fact, it's not even top 9 on Switch 1. It's all the way down in the 10th slot. It's barely beating Nintendo Switch Sports, which I think suggests to me, again, this is all my conjecture, but if it's number 10 as a brand new game on Switch 1, I think this points to its Switch 2 sales not being that great either, at least in the grand scheme of things. And I think, again, that is both saying that Metroid Prime 4 isn't a massive title in general, but also that, you know, not having a big Switch 2 title is kind of hurting or suppressing Switch 2 sales in general, because there wasn't that exciting game to get for November. Now, again, in the grander scheme of things, I don't think this really matters all that much. There's going to be more big games coming, you know, whether they're, you know, Mario or Splatoon or who knows what else. And I don't think this means a whole lot in the moment. But I do think this is concerning, you know, for these video game manufacturers, the fact that the economy is in this state, possibly having this broad effect suppressing all these sales. And also, you know, Nintendo, like, they've done a pretty good job this year, I think, maintaining a consistent software release schedule, but, you know, hasn't really been anything super exciting within the last few weeks outside of Legend ZA, which again, and Metroid Prime 4, which are both available on Switch 1. So yeah, I don't know. I just wonder if that's partially why Switch 2 sales aren't beating PS5 right now for November. But again, that doesn't even speak to the broader trend of sales being down across the board for everyone. So we're gonna have to wait and see how things shake out, you know, if the economy recovers, if people have more spending money next year, to see how that may shift, you know, change things around, and, you know, what big software releases are out next year that could help bolster Switch 2 sales. I don't think Mario Tennis Fever is gonna be it, but of course there'll be plenty more next year, including Splatoon Raiders and more that we don't even know about. So those are my off-the-top thoughts about everything, everyone. Let me know in the comments below what do you make of all of this. Is there something else I'm missing? Do you think Switch 2 being outsold by PS5 at this point is worrying for Nintendo? I'd love to hear what you think of this in the comments below. With that, thanks for watching, everyone. We'll catch you later. Bye.